Good evening, Los Angeles. Yesterday, George Floyd was laid to rest in Houston, next to his mother, the same mama he called out for in his last minutes on this earth. And today, his brother, Philanese, went before Congress, and he spoke about what this moment means and how our nation can make sure that George's name means something, that his death amounts to the change that we need to see. As his brother put it, he said, when George cried out for his last breaths, his, quote, calls for help were ignored. Please listen to the calls of our family and to the calls ringing out in the streets across the world. People of all backgrounds, genders, and race have come together to demand change. Everybody in this world, everybody in this city has to listen, and we are. Powerful, peaceful, passionate protest is who we are as Americans. No change has ever come to this country without the power of that protest, without our collective voices saying, this is our nation, we belong here, this is a part of it, and we demand that this nation treat us all equally with the justice that we deserve. People have filled our streets, but beyond the power of the protests we see on so many blocks of so many neighborhoods in so many cities, not just in this country, but around the globe, there's also the opening of other doors, quiet conversations with our families, in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, about the meaning of this moment. And again, what we will do not just there, but here, where we live, where we sleep, where we work, to make sure that racial justice is something that we all own, that we all take action to enact, that it not only happens in Congress and in city halls, but that it happens in our workplaces and in our schools, that it happens on our streets and in our blocks, in our own homes, the work that we need to do to make sure that this moment is indeed a turning point for our country. On Zoom calls, at dinner tables, people are asking, what do these words mean? For the first time in a long time, what is equity? What is justice? How do we want to define what public safety means to all of us in this nation? I believe we will emerge from these days as a different city and a different country, a better city and a better country, and I hope to a better world. And I support the work that we are doing because we've been through so much for the last nearly 2 weeks. The trauma, first of George Floyd's death, then what we saw and felt on our streets when we demanded justice, the few who rode along for purposes to distract away from that mission, in the midst of a COVID-19 crisis and an economic meltdown unlike any we've experienced. These have been traumatic days. Los Angeles, I hope you're all taking care of yourself, that you're demanding that we make progress in all of these crises for racial justice, of our economy, of our health, at the same time that we take care of our collective peace. And we've seen that peace settle down. Just as George Floyd was put in the ground yesterday, we are ourselves asking what comes next in the closing of that chapter, to demand justice first and foremost for him and his family, but also for all the other George Floyds, and those who don't have names because they are living shorter lives, or they're never able to graduate or get a good job, or serving time in prison disproportionately, or living on the streets of a city in a tent. These are the moments for us to make sure that peace is more than a moment. It is a movement for each one of us that comes through justice. And we will make every second, every minute of this moment count. And thank you for moving us closer to the ideals of fairness and belonging. You're already stirring change around this country and in city halls like this one. We hear you. We're changing our budget to make investments where we need them, $250 million to start in communities of color, for youth, for folks who are underbanked, for those who don't have the same health care that others have, to deal with mental health. And those conversations are happening almost every hour of every day with coalitions and groups and proven practitioners, people who are offering new ways of looking at models, to not shoulder everything on our police officers, but to demand also accountability in the way that we police, to look at a way that we can reimagine our city and make sure that our country, too, lives up to its ideals. How we can direct this to jobs and community investment in neighborhoods and zip codes that don't have enough. After 1992, I shared with you it took 30 years for us to recover to just the level of jobs that we had before the unrest. I also learned another statistic this past weekend that the Christopher Commission and those who spoke about what needed to change in the wake of the Rodney King trial and beating, that it wasn't just about policing, it was critically about policing, but it was also about the cycle of despair, the underinvestment in our communities that back then was billed at about $6 billion of underinvestment. In today's dollars, $10.5 billion. To make sure that your zip code doesn't dictate whether you graduate from high school, get a good job, go to college, whether you serve time in prison or not. That the color of our skin, that our cultural backgrounds shouldn't hold us back. They should be our ticket to the greatness and the belonging and the diversity that defines who we are. I know that in communities of color, for Latinos and Asian Pacific Islanders, and most notably for our Black Angelenos, for folks who've been denied equitable opportunities, this is our moment to do something about it, not just as a city, but as a nation. And I know that most officers live up to the badge and uphold the promise to protect and to serve with honor. But we can't hide from the change we need to make. The additional steps to advance 21st century policing goals. We have to keep leading the way. We have to keep advancing through things like our community safety partnership, which put police officers in our communities for 5 years and create relationships between those who pay their salaries and themselves. To create closer bonds between Angelenos, so a police officer isn't somebody to fear because of the color of your skin, but somebody to embrace because you pay their salaries and they are there to serve you. As Connie Rice, a great angel in this city of angels, put it recently in an LA Times piece, all communities need to receive safety and protection, not just those neighborhoods on the right side of the thin blue line. Yesterday, the LAPD ended the use of carotid holds, and the Police Commission will continue to reform the department to ensure officers build and don't break trust with communities. And today, the LAPD announced that it has begun 58 investigations of officer misconduct related to the recent protests and unrest here in Los Angeles. I'm very troubled by much of the footage that I saw from some of these incidents. We know that nobody hates a cop that does the wrong thing more than a good cop. And excessive force has no place in Los Angeles. So the department has 40 investigators looking into these incidents along with social media, video, and photos. Some police officers have been assigned to non-field duties pending the outcome of these investigations, and our independent inspector general, set up because of trauma in years past, will monitor all investigations to ensure that they are thorough, accurate, and objective. Every step we take to heal, to repair, to move forward, to be safe in our communities, these will be your victories. Just as we've led the way in this city on minimum wage, on making community college free, on dealing with the threat of earthquakes, and so many other issues, what we do in Los Angeles leads in California and then in the nation. And we're seeing this in cities across the country who are saying it is time for us to invest public safety dollars in also racial justice, because that makes us all safer. That makes us all have a better shot at the American dream, towards prosperity and the silent killers that don't make the headlines, but that Black Americans live with every single day. I know we're only at the beginning of our journey, and it will be a painful one at many moments. But it should also be a joyous opportunity for us to embrace that vision of a nation we all hold in our hearts, that common ground that we all felt through the disgust of the video of George Floyd being killed is a moment for us to also celebrate what we see on the streets. People of every background coming day after day after day, demanding we collectively do better. And mayors and city councils aren't the only ones that are heeding these calls. State and federal leaders are listening too. They understand, as we do, that this is a potentially transformative moment for our nation. Yesterday, I sent a letter to our representatives in Sacramento offering my full support for the legislative package put forward by the California Legislative Black Caucus to restore voting rights to those people who are serving parole, to end the state's ban on affirmative action to make right what is wrong in our history, to strengthen emergency response services for historically neglected communities, and finally, to begin to seek reparations for the impact of slavery on Black Americans, something when I was on the City Council we passed support of nearly a decade ago. These are a bold set of measures meant to begin the righting of wrongs of history this year. Let this be a year not just of protest, but of progress. Let us pass the Schools and Communities First initiative that would properly fund schools where increasingly our Black and brown students are warehoused with the poverty that many of them grow up with the trauma that too many of them experience. But we can make that right by investing in education. At the national level, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, and more than 200 members of Congress have also introduced the Justice in Policing Act, taking reforms enacted at the local level, including from cities like LA, and making them standards across our country. From banning chokeholds to ending no-knock warrants, holding police officers accountable for their misconduct, and ensuring greater transparency across law enforcement. It's no accident that this legislation is sponsored by two of our own, by Representative Karen Bass, who represents us here in Los Angeles and chairs the Congressional Black Caucus, and our Senator, Kamala Harris. Congress should quickly pass this legislation. The President should sign it right away, because the American people have waited too long, enough for all of us to act. This legislation also bans lynching in America, upholds that the idea of lynching will have a higher penalty, something that Congress has passed in the last few years have refused to pass. It's unthinkable in this day and age. This isn't just about politics. This is about what's right and just. Let's get this done now. Racial justice is not the only crisis that we face, and we cannot lose sight that we are still in the biggest medical pandemic of our lives, one that has claimed over 111,000 lives here in America, and that is not any less dangerous today as the day it arrived. If you are out protesting, as I've said, please go get a test, a free test, at one of our open testing centers. Consider self-quarantining for 14 days and get tested for COVID-19. We have a test waiting for you at one of the 24 testing sites across the city and county, the capacity to test 20,000 people each day. And by the end of today, we will have tested nearly 250,000 Angelenos. And additionally, I'm very grateful to CVS pharmacies for providing tests at 49 CVS locations across the city. Many people have asked, are these tests also free? My understanding is that they're free. If you have insurance, they'll get reimbursement that way. If you don't, through Medi-Cal. So if CVS is even more convenient, go there and make sure you're getting a test as well. My office is working with our neighborhood councils, our community organizers, local organizations, media outlets, the Citizen app, the Research and Multicultural Digital Agency, H-Code, and others to reach communities of color and protesters with the vital information about how to get tested, where to go, and how to do it. So protect yourself, protect your family, protect your fellow activists, and go to coronavirus.lacity.org/testing to make sure you get a test today. Your decision to get tested will help us take additional steps forward into a new and safer reality. As I mentioned before, Los Angeles County has met the state's benchmarks to reopen more activities and businesses. But I'll be honest, it makes me nervous. We have earned the right, we've learned how to live better with COVID-19. But I know as we've been focused on racial justice, we can't lose sight of how our personal responsibility to not spread COVID-19 further as the state allows and then the county mandates these openings, that we too can stay safe even as we increasingly go back to work and to public spaces as well as businesses that have been closed. I'll speak to more of that in a moment, but let me announce what the county has moved forward. Effective this Friday, gyms and fitness centers, museums, aquariums, and galleries, as well as hotels and day camps and their pools may reopen in Los Angeles County. Visiting a gym, museum, or a youth camp will not be what you are used to. It'll be different, with all visitors and staff required to practice physical distancing and to wear cloth face coverings. Professional sports can also resume without spectators. I know we're all looking forward to watching those games on TV. Camping will be allowed, and our signature industry of film and television and music production may resume. And in Orange County, Disneyland has announced it will open on July 17th. Please let me remind all businesses that you will be allowed to open on Friday, but you are not required to. That all of us are not required to necessarily go to these spaces and places. If you have pre-existing conditions, if you're a vulnerable population, please still stay at home. You're the most likely to not only be able to get COVID-19, but to potentially die from it. And we want you to live. We want to help protect you, but that depends on each one of us doing the right thing. And for those businesses that don't reopen right away, we want to help you get to the place where you can. Take critical steps to keep yourselves and your customers and your employees safe. We have guidance on this depending on what type of business you have at coronavirus.lacity.org/business, and check them out, read them. Make sure you're doing the county checklist and posting it as is required by our health department. It's a very detailed set of protocols to make sure you're safe. We've seen in other places, in other states, where folks aren't taking those protocols seriously. We're so tired of COVID-19. Seems like the numbers have flatlined that we don't have to be careful anymore. Please be careful. You are legally required to go through those protocols before opening, whether it's enhanced cleaning and disinfecting, procedures for your employees and spacing. And again, all of that can be found at coronavirus.lacity.org/business. These are very important steps forward, but as the data makes clear, COVID-19 is still here. It's still deadly. We have to remain vigilant. We have to keep doing our part, physical distancing and washing our hands, wearing our face coverings. And we cannot take these changes as license to gather in large groups again without restrictions. We should all still default to being safer at home whenever we can. And I know how tough it is. I know how celebratory it was for folks in protest to actually be out and just to see human beings again. I felt that when I went out to protest outside City Hall. But we have to be careful. We have to be safe. And we have to realize that many more people can and probably will die. But that number can be reduced by our actions, by what we do. There are still many businesses that remain closed too. Nail salons and tattoo shops, bars and wineries, movie theaters, concert halls, arcades, and bowling alleys. And today, a reminder that this is still with us, the county reported 1,275 new cases. I've said these numbers for months now, so we become kind of dulled by them, immune. That's 1,275 new cases, and now a total of 67,064 LA County residents have been diagnosed positively with COVID-19. This was a 2% increase since yesterday, and we've seen on average almost 1,300 new cases a day. In the city of Los Angeles, there are 387 new cases, bringing our total to now over 30,887, a 1% increase since yesterday. And this is the most sober reminder. We learned of 61 more deaths in the last 24 hours, bringing our total to 2,768 deaths, a 2% increase since yesterday. Increasingly, we all know, I shared with you a cousin of mine that's passed away from COVID-19. These are hitting us, and they're hitting close to home. And we all know that we have a role to save lives. You've done a marvelous job. One study that came out said that there are literally millions upon millions of people that would have gotten COVID-19 if we hadn't all successfully stayed at home. How Los Angeles led that movement across the country. We've done the right thing. Let's keep doing the right thing and saving lives. One of the things that we focus on a lot too is our infection rate. How many people does the average person who's positive reinfect? As you'll remember, that number peaked around 3 early on in this crisis, so that each infected person was getting 3 more people sick. That's why those numbers were going up at higher and higher double-digit percentages every day. But through our collective efforts to flatten the curve, through your sacrifices, we brought that down to 1 and slightly below 1, meaning COVID-19 was not spreading out of control, that our hospitals were not at risk of seeing a surge in patients and being overwhelmed, and we could take these gradual steps to reopen Los Angeles. But as we reopen, the infection rate may continue to rise, as we heard from our Department of Public Health and Dr. Ferrer. County estimates now indicate it might be closer to 1.3, and it's certainly above 1. These are real case and hospitalization data that we follow every single day. And I want you to know that we will continue to follow these numbers really closely in what we do and what gets opened. To support the efforts of opening safely, the city is working closely with the County Department of Public Health and Dr. Ferrer, and we've offered City of Los Angeles staff to help with one of the most critical ways to stop the spread: contact tracing. Contact tracing is just what we do to make sure when we know somebody is diagnosed as positive, we can trace the contacts that she or he has over the last days when they could have been infectious. That means that we can go to the 12 or 15 or 20 people that you had a serious interaction with to let them know that they should quarantine as well. This is the way to continue to flatten the curve. And so this past week, we offered city employees to help our amazing workers at the County Department of Public Health as supplemental contact tracers. More than 300 disaster service workers from the city of Los Angeles will join the contact tracing teams. And thank you to these angels who work for you. You pay their salaries. They often do other things and work in other departments, from our libraries to our parks. They are going to be deployed to make sure across LA County that we are safe and that we let people know that they are at risk. They proactively reach out to people who then in turn can talk to people they've been in contact with, and will help us identify the source of the spread to be able to, as we open up our economy, make sure that doesn't result in new outbreaks throughout the county. So together as one, whether it's the city working with the county, whether it's you doing your part, whether it's businesses going through those checklists, we will do this, and we're going to do it together. This has been a time of so much pain, so much sorrow and grief, of things that were lost, of graduations that were done in cars, of the pain of what it means to be Black in America every day that long predated this, of those that are vulnerable on our streets because they're experiencing homelessness, of those who had pre-existing medical conditions that already made them vulnerable, but COVID-19 preys on. It's been almost too much for all of us to contain. But Los Angeles, I've been so proud of you. So proud of protesters on the street standing up for what's right. Proud of people wearing a mask to protect their neighbors and say that they love strangers, that they want to protect their lives. So proud of city workers who are delivering those city services I told you would never stop in the midst of this. Whether it's police officers that are out there and firefighters, whether it's our Rec and Parks staff that are running our homeless shelters. We have done things that we didn't think were possible, and yet we have so much more to do. I know that we can continue to lead this city and this nation. We can lead it forward with what we're doing in response to COVID-19. We can be the example of standing businesses up and bringing jobs back in dealing with the economic crisis. And we must be the leaders when it comes to racial justice, not just in policing, but also the investments we make in health and in hope and in healing, in education and in jobs, in making sure that America's sins once and for all are righted so that we do have one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all of us. When we see hate, we come together to deliver hope. When we see conflict, we cooperate. When we see a health threat, we all become the health workers. Where we see structural racism, we must end it. Where we see an unprecedented public health crisis, we take unmatched steps to solve it. And we will see these better days ahead. We will rise to this moment and meet it, not miss it. And we'll lead the nation and bend the arc towards justice of our future. So as always, stay strong, Los Angeles. Stay healthy. Whenever you can, stay home. And strength and love to all of us in these most difficult times. We'll march through these fires together. Thank you. And with that, I'll be happy to take some questions.
Hey, Mayor, thank you very much for taking our questions. The first one comes from Emily Alpert Reyes of the LA Times. She asks, in New York City, Buffalo, Philadelphia, and other cities, officers have reportedly been suspended for violent tactics against protesters. In LA, numerous incidents of police force against protesters and bystanders have been reported, including protesters being beaten with batons and a disabled homeless man being shot in the face. But as of Friday, a LAPD spokesman says that no officers have been suspended. Are you concerned that the LAPD appears to be slower to take action on these incidents than other cities facing similar concerns about use of force against protesters? The LAPD said today that 7 officers have been taken out of the field pending their investigations. Given the number of incidents under investigation, what is the standard for taking an officer off the streets while an investigation is underway? Do you think it is the correct standard?
I don't know that there's a single standard. Those are judgment calls that are made by both the chief and by other supervisors. But was mentioned, I might have already answered that in my remarks earlier. There are officers at 7 who have been relieved of field duty. And in some cases, if the investigation calls for suspension, we do that regularly, and that can and will happen. Each one of these deserves the full breadth of investigation, as I said, transparently, honestly, and accountably. That is something that the people of Los Angeles, who pay the salaries of myself and every other public official, including police officers, deserves. And it is my promise to folks. As I mentioned, I think it's important for me to speak out when you see images that run counter to who we are and the professional standards that we expect. And as I've said, if there's consequences, including suspension or removal, those will come. I also want to thank all the positive videos that I saw out there, moments where officers sat down and talked to folks, took a knee. We need to have both sides of the story, the first piece and accountability, and we need to make sure that we also realize the exhaustion that folks have out there and the service that they've given to us. And I don't think that we have to choose between those two. Any officer who would say when we discipline officers who have done wrong, that's wrong, doesn't belong in this department. And vice versa, anybody who would say that's the full story, hasn't looked at all the other interactions. Progress is tough, sometimes it's painful, but I'm glad that we have in Los Angeles, much stronger than those cities, by the way, that were mentioned, an accountable, independent, and civilian-led investigation system, which very few cities across the country do have. So it's not what we do wrong, it's how we deal with it. It is how we make sure there's accountability, and I trust that we will. But I do not believe there's a single standard for that. But let me follow up if we do have. We have, I think, some guidelines for those.
Thank you, Mayor. The next question comes from Steve Gregory with KFI News.
Hey, Steve.
Mayor, LAPD's Media Relations Division is now the subject of a second lawsuit over claims of racial discrimination, harassment, and retaliation by leadership within the division. I'm told a third lawsuit is forthcoming for similar claims. How will leadership be held accountable? And since the head of the division is an employee of your office, what is being done to discipline and or suspend those in charge?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a budget technicality that it's paid through my office. But in the police department, like any department, there's no place for racism, there's no place for discrimination. And we as a city not only have internal mechanisms to deal with that. I'm very proud, as I've mentioned in my last press briefing, that July 1st, for the entire city of Los Angeles, we'll have a Department of Human and Civil Rights that will deal with those claims also in the private sector as well as the public sector. But while I can't comment on any ongoing investigations of something right now, let me just say very clearly that racism exists not just in the blatant ways that we saw so horribly exercised against George Floyd, but in subtle ways that keep people back, that discriminate against people when it comes to promotions, when it comes to opportunities, when it comes to education, when it comes to health, and there is no place in Los Angeles for that. And so I expect that justice should be served. But investigations are ongoing, and I cannot speak about the specific case right now. Next, please.
The next question comes from Alex Michelson with Fox 11 News. We've seen an increase in COVID-19 cases and will likely see an even greater increase because of the protests. What science are you looking at that says it's okay to reopen now, and why not a few weeks ago? Were we too cautious then, or were we possibly being too lax now? Do you understand why this looks arbitrary to a whole lot of people?
I can understand that because it comes from the state first, and then the counties have to make decisions. The state, remember, this can be very confusing. I think a lot of people who watch this say, Mayor Garcetti, why did or didn't you decide to open or close something? Right now, the state says what you can do if you meet certain thresholds. If you meet those thresholds, then it's up to the county to decide whether they will or not. So these decisions that are being made through our county public health and our supervisors are based in data, and I do have confidence in them. It's a very difficult balancing act. Some of the things I might go a little bit slower on. I'm nervous about, gymnasiums and other places, though if you hold back one city, people can just go next door and work out, can go next door to a restaurant. So the public health impact is that a region really does need to move together. That if Orange County is doing different than LA County, if Santa Monica is doing different than Pomona, these are places where people will interact with each other. But we've shown that our hospital data, which is the first thing I look at, is still remaining steady. We have hospital capacity. Our admissions are stable. I'd like to see our deaths coming down because all deaths are incredibly tragic in this, but we've seen them also remain steady. And we always said, look, every couple weeks we'll take a look at those numbers. If in 2 or 3 weeks from now we start to see a rapid uptick, that's going to cause us all to pause for a moment, to figure out how we either have to do better with wearing our masks, cleaning our hands, physically distancing, or the rules and regulations of what's permitted. When we started this crisis, I think a lot of people said, oh, if data is bad, shut things down. That's the only weapon you have. We now have many more weapons in our arsenal. We know that we can do things smarter. We know we can do them better. We can temperature check. We can look at testing to the way that we've ramped it up for people with and without symptoms. We can hopefully get that testing back to where providers used to give it, through our doctors, through our clinics, through our neighborhoods. All of those things will dictate it. But as I said, when I get nervous, I remind people it's not just about the rules and regulations. It's about our behavior. If we behave better, if we continue to not just say, hey, I can't take it anymore, I'm going to sneak in a gathering of a bunch of people that's more than allowed instead of just going home, we will see consequences. It might not be you who dies, but somebody in Los Angeles will. So continue to do the right thing. I feel confident of the advice that comes down and the rules that have been made by the county. We'd always like more heads up from the state. Sometimes we find out that morning. The county makes the decision that afternoon, and then I'm here in the evening sharing that information, and people say, wait, you didn't give us much heads up. But I'd much rather give people the heads up as quickly as possible and then remind them, don't worry, it doesn't mean tomorrow you have to go to a store. It doesn't mean that if you're a store owner, you have to open. Take your time, get it right, read the advice, comply by the medical suggestions, and then I think we can manage our way while we wait for a vaccine or some other kind of therapeutic intervention that can help us live with COVID-19 or defeat it.
Thank you,
Next
Mayor.
question.
The next question comes from Claudia Pashuta from KNX 1070. Activists have made it clear they see taking up to $150 million out of LAPD's budget as a start at best. They're calling for slashing police funding, and some want to see the department abolished. What do you tell them?
So let me be clear, $150 million is not enough. And it's not just going to come out of a police budget, it's going to come out of all of our budgets. If we're not reprioritizing dealing with racial injustice, we're not meeting this moment. If we're not cutting the tax cuts at the federal level and reinvesting that while we see people who are multi-billionaires getting rich in the midst of COVID-19, while we have depression-era unemployment here in Los Angeles that disproportionately affects our communities of color, we're missing this moment. If we don't pass Schools and Communities First, which will be on our ballot in November, which would actually not raise taxes for any homeowners, but would allow us to take the kind of worst elements of Prop 13 that have underfunded our schools and finally allow our students to have a level of funding that we see in states like New York and other places, we're missing this moment. It can't just be squeezed from one place. It can't just be symbolic. It actually has to be real. If we're not giving youth of color jobs this summer and into the fall and winter, as we've been expanding here in Los Angeles but need to go even further, there are kids who don't grow up with somebody able to give them an internship, who don't know who to call when they want to get into the movie industry, or they want to become a doctor, or they want to help as grow up and become somebody who can be a scientist. We have to do that work. So I agree with the sentiment that this is just a start. And my promise to people is we have to think about reimagining public safety, but we have to do that carefully, boldly at the same time. We have to do that in an inclusive way so that our officers don't shoulder things like mental health and homelessness disproportionately. But those conversations have to be done in a way that is backed up by numbers, and numbers that will never be enough just coming from the city of LA. We're a third of the budget of the county. The county is a third of the budget of our state, I believe. No, sorry, is about a fifth of the budget of our state. And our federal government, where we spend most of our taxpayer dollars, need to come back and to invest. So I was very pleased yesterday, for instance, to receive $167 million from the federal government on homelessness. That's a bigger investment than anything that we're talking about cutting right here out of a single department. To look at what we can do with our coronavirus relief funds, which I'm working closely with our city council, and instead of just reimbursing the city, even tightening all our collective belts a little further so we can invest that in places where if you're a black entrepreneur trying to get a loan and you can't get one, you've never been able to start a business while other businesses have come in national chains and have been able to get bailed out. That is what this moment is about. If Black lives matter, they can't just matter when it comes to policing. It has to matter also in where we invest in our communities of color across the board. Next question, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The next question comes from Joel Pollack of Breitbart News. He asks, were you following medical or scientific advice when you broke social distancing to take a knee at the Black Lives Matter protest last week?
So I wore my mask out there and spoke for a moment, but no, I think for all of us, everybody who's been at a protest, it's very important for us all to make sure, as I said, we get tested. I've gotten a test this week to make sure, and I'll do one next week as well, since I was out there. I was there for a limited period of time. The standard is closer than 6 feet for 10 minutes is when you are at high risk. So I was following that advice, limiting the amount of time, wearing a mask. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Next question, please.
Okay. The next question comes from Jonah Valdez with the Los Angeles Daily News. Mayor Garcetti, the LAPD announced today it is investigating 56 misconduct complaints, and
Correct.
He also wanted to clarify if it's 56 or 58. And that 7 LAPD officers were placed on non-field duty based on those investigations, amid calls for reviews and analysis into use of force incidents by activists, federal lawmakers, and city council members. Do you think the LAPD has done enough in response to the force used against peaceful protesters? And his follow-up is also activists today called on LAPD to stop using rubber bullets on protesters altogether. Do you support that call for police to no longer use those less than lethal rounds on the protesters?
So the number I have is 58. As I mentioned, there's 40 investigators that are assigned just to these cases. We take them very seriously. One of the things that came out of the consent decree is we have a very robust Inspector General's office compared to other cities, both in absolute terms and even in per capita terms. We have, of course, internal affairs as well, which is the police side investigating the police, but these are the independent civilian investigators as well. So I'm confident in them. I'm confident that they're taking it seriously, and I know that they are reviewing not only the video footage, camera-worn, body-worn cameras as well, as the complaints that people have. And please go to our social media. If you have not put a complaint forward and you've wanted to, please get in contact with the Inspector General. The second half of it was, remind me, the second half of the question?
LAPD, activists called today on LAPD to stop using
the
rubber
bullets,
bullets.
Right. So the terms that I think there's plastic rounds that have beanbags in them that are used. And as I said during this, I wanted to see them not used whenever possible. Whether we get to a full-on ban, there are moments when police officers we saw, like the first night, are taking bottles, are taking bricks. Some of them, one, as we all know, nearly lost his life with a cracked skull. That there may be some moments they may be appropriate, but I would like the commission to recommend, is there a way for us to get away from that? And certainly when it's peaceful protests, it seems that we should always look at the most peaceful ways and less than lethal ways to be able to make sure we keep peace in protests and that we keep the ability for people to exercise their First Amendment rights. So absolutely, whenever possible, and it's something that we are looking at. But tonight, I'm going to ask the Police Commission to give us the advice on that, the Civilian-Run Commission, and I'm glad that we could minimize those uses. But there was some very troubling footage that we saw of folks where it seemed that there's absolutely no reason why somebody should have taken one of these less than lethal rounds in a position, sitting in a wheelchair or something else. But we need to make sure those investigations are fully done. Next question, please.
Elizabeth Chow from Los Angeles Daily News asks, what is your position on the People's Budget LA and the proposal to defund the LAPD budget, bringing it from 53.8% of the unrestricted revenues to 5.7%? And have you met with representatives of those who support that budget, such as Black Lives Matter?
No, I've met with some representatives of Black Lives Matter, been in forums with folks who I'm sure have supported that. But you know, the budget that we put forward in the city of Los Angeles is a detailed budget, not so much an aspirational budget. I don't support that. I'm glad that that vision is out there and that people have the ability to put that forward. But I do want to correct, you know, you can create all sorts of different slices. The reason why we have a percentage of what's called unrestricted general fund that is about 54% for police. The real number is that we have 11% of our overall budget. If you want to look at, cut out some of the things that we do in other departments like water and power, you could say 17%. And at most, if you want to include retired peace officers and their pension and healthcare costs, you can get up to about 33%, but it is not 54% of our budget. And remember, our school district, which is $7 billion, our county, which does not only public safety, but also does all the mental health care, social services, all the human stuff that people are saying we should invest in, that we split our tax dollars among a number of different places, including our community college district and others. So we already have a percentage that is considerably lower, but to have 5% or something, and there's no specifics exactly where that would be put. No, I'm not supportive of that, but I'm listening. Whether it's the people's budget, whether it's folks that are out there on the streets, I do hear, there's many different visions about where to put the budget, and a lot of people have written saying make no cuts to the police budget. I'm for racial justice, but please don't take it from there. I listen to all of those. That's my role. That's my responsibility, to say I hear you, to listen to those pieces, and to try to make sure we meet this moment. What is loud and clear, and I think where I agree with almost everybody who has written to me or put something forward, is that we have underinvested in the communities that most need us. We didn't just wake up to that now, by the way. That's why I led the largest public transportation initiative in American history ×2, because those who are dependent on public transit and can't afford a car deserve something better. And for the next 40 years, we're building 15 new rail lines. It's the reason I put forward with city council members Proposition HHH to build more housing for people experiencing homelessness than anybody, which disproportionately hits our Black Angelenos. It's why we raised the minimum wage. It's why we've shifted a much more growth into our gang reduction youth development programs for our young people than LAPD, which is actually going to be down 100 officers this year. Budgets go up because of inflation, but it's actually down by 100 officers, and equivalent down by a couple hundred more because of other cuts and furloughs to the civilian force. So we need, at this moment, to make sure we are putting our money where our mouth is, that we're actually helping a young Black woman, Black boy, that we're investing in schools, that we're investing in jobs, that we're investing in healthcare. And that can't just be done by the city. I make that call to other cities, to our county governments, to our state, and especially to our federal government. If we truly believe in justice, follow us, take the steps forward that we have done, and we can get there together. Next question, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And the final two questions come from Joel, who we heard from earlier. He asks, social science research shows that crime increases dramatically in communities of color when there are fewer police. Wouldn't those communities be best served by a safe environment for residents and business owners? And what is the definition of systemic racism?
So, no, research isn't. There's plenty of departments that have lots of officers and crime is out of control. Or is much higher in places that have lower per capita. So there isn't a correlation that's just throw more officers and crime always goes down. I do believe that you can't have too few officers, but you can also, for instance, here in Los Angeles, we have a lower per capita number of officers than a number of East Coast cities, for instance, take Philadelphia, and much lower crime rates here than in those cities. So there isn't that correspondence. That's a false myth. The second part of the question was what again?
What is your definition of systemic racism?
Systemic racism is racism that's built into systems. Slavery was systemic racism. Segregation is systemic racism. The idea that a child who is born into a black family, on average, that family has $17,000 of wealth, and a white family has $171,000 of wealth, that's economic systemic racism. Freed slaves were promised 40 acres and a mule, didn't get it. Reparations are an attempt to look at righting the wrong of systemic racism. Systemic racism is the idea that, as I just heard from even my fellow elected officials, you can be a powerful black man in America and you're still going to get pulled over all the time in a way that our white counterparts aren't. That is, systemic racism means that there are systems set up both in and by government, as well as in our economy and our private sector, in our schools, and in our communities that systematically, they aren't just an individual. The difference is an individual racism, somebody who makes an individual decision that is racist. When collectively, these have folks who are African American more likely to be homeless, more likely to be in jail, more likely to be of poor health, more likely to be undereducated, more likely to be underemployed or unemployed. That's the result of a system. The counter is, a lot of people say, oh, that's just people's personal choices. Try starting at the starting line 50 yards behind everybody else. And then you tell me if everything is equal. That's what this moment is about. And I think that while there's some who still want to push back on that, the marvelous thing is this is finally a moment when overwhelmingly America gets it. The question is now for all of us, what are you going to do about it? Thank you all for the questions. Thank you for being here. I'm going to switch to Spanish as well to give my address. Thank you, everybody. Be safe out there, and we'll see you soon. All right. Muy buenas tardes, Los Ángeles. Hoy el hermano de George Floyd, Philanese, se dirigió al Congreso sobre su hermano. Dijo que cuando George estuvo pidiendo ayuda, sus llamadas se ignoraron. Y le pidió al Congreso hoy que escuchen a las llamadas de todo el mundo pidiendo cambio. Aquí en nuestra ciudad estamos escuchando, estamos liderando. No dejaremos pasar este momento sin tomar acción concreta. Para todos quienes se están manifestando, ya están impactando el cambio aquí en el ayuntamiento. Estamos identificando $250 millones de nuestro presupuesto para invertir en empleos y programas comunitarios para angelinos afroamericanos y en comunidades de color. Las comunidades quienes históricamente no han recibido las mismas oportunidades que otras. Ayer el Departamento de Policía eliminó el uso de la compresión de la arteria carótida y la Comisión de la Policía continuará reformando el departamento para asegurar que los agentes de policía puedan tener la confianza de la comunidad. Estoy muy preocupado por lo que vi en los videos de estos incidentes. Como lo he dicho anteriormente, no toleramos tácticas violentas en Los Ángeles y el departamento las están investigando. Algunos agentes de policía han sido asignados a trabajo administrativo mientras los resultados de estas investigaciones quedan pendientes. Y nuestro inspector general independiente está monitoreando todas las investigaciones para asegurar que sean extensivas e imparciales. Y nuestros líderes estatales y federales también están escuchando sus voces. He apoyado el grupo legislativo de afroamericanos de California para restaurar el derecho a votar para personas en libertad condicional, para acabar con la prohibición estatal de la acción afirmativa, fortalecer los servicios de respuesta de emergencia para comunidades descuidadas y finalmente buscar reparaciones por el impacto de la esclavitud en afroamericanos. Estas medidas son audaces y buscan corregir daños históricos. La legislatura del Estado debe aprobar estas propuestas lo más pronto posible. Más de 200 miembros del Congreso también impulsaron la Ley de Justicia en la Policía para implementar reforma policial municipal al nivel nacional. El Congreso debe aprobar esta ley inmediatamente. Esto no se trata de política. Esto es una cuestión de lo que es correcto y justo. Hagámoslo ahora. Estoy orgulloso de todos quienes se unieron en las calles para exigir la justicia racial cada día en todos los vecindarios de Los Ángeles. Es una inspiración. Estoy de acuerdo con la decisión del fiscal de Ciudad, Fuhr, y no presentar cargos criminales a quienes violaron el toque de queda, excepto en los casos donde hubo violencia, vandalismo o saqueo. Después de una semana pacífica, la Guardia Nacional salió de Los Ángeles este fin de semana y espero que no regrese. Si estuviste en una manifestación o si piensas participar en una, por favor lleva una cobertura facial, practica la sana distancia cuando sea posible y considera autocuarentena durante 14 días y hágase la prueba de COVID-19. Tenemos 24 sitios de pruebas con la capacidad de hacerle la prueba a 20,000 personas cada día. Y para el final de hoy habremos hecho la prueba a 650,000 personas. Además, estoy agradecido a CBS por ofrecer pruebas en 49 tiendas de CBS por toda la ciudad. Mi oficina está trabajando con los consejos vecinales, organizadores, medios comunitarios y la Agencia de Investigación Multicultural y Digital, H-Code, para alcanzar a comunidades de color y los manifestantes con la información crítica de cómo hacerse una prueba. Para protegerse a ustedes y a sus familias, haga una cita en la página coronavirus.lacity.org/testing. Esta noche puedo anunciar que empezando el viernes, los gimnasios, museos, galerías, zoológicos y acuarios, al igual que hoteles y campamentos juntos con sus piscinas, pueden abrir de nuevo en la ciudad de Los Ángeles. La experiencia será diferente. Todos deben practicar la sana distancia y llevar coberturas faciales. Además, se permiten deportes profesionales sin espectadores y acampar. Y se permite la producción cinematográfica de música y de televisión. Y el 17 de julio se abrirá Disneyland en el condado Orange. Les recuerdo que negocios no están obligados a abrir el viernes. Pueden tomar el tiempo que necesitan para mantener a sus empleados y clientes protegidos. Visita la página coronavirus.lacity.org/business para ver pautas de cómo hacerlo de manera segura y para encontrar los protocolos requeridos por el condado. Seguimos adelante. Sin embargo, el COVID-19 sigue siendo una amenaza. Tenemos que mantener las precauciones para protegernos y debemos seguir quedándonos en casa lo más que sea posible, por favor. Siguen cerrados salones de uñas y de tatuajes, bares, teatros, estadios y arcadas y boleras. Y todavía es prohibido tener fiestas adentro o afuera. Hoy el condado anunció 1,275 nuevos casos, con un total de 67,064. En la ciudad tuvimos 387 nuevos casos, un total de 30,887. Y hoy supimos de 61 fallecidos, con un total de 2,768. Este es muy triste y esta crisis continua, este virus es una amenaza a nuestra salud. Y lo siento por las familias que están sufriendo por sus pérdidas. Y nuestra tasa de infección está subiendo. Antes, con nuestros esfuerzos, habíamos bajado a 1. Ahora el condado estima que es 1.3. Ten cuidado, por favor, con sus acciones, con sus prácticas. Estamos trabajando con el condado para desplegar rastreadores de contactos durante esta emergencia. Esta última semana desplegamos el primer equipo. En las próximas 3 semanas, más de 300 empleados de la ciudad de Los Ángeles se unirán a este equipo con el condado. Este equipo nos ayudará a monitorear el virus. Si uno se pone en contacto con usted, por favor, comuníquese con ellos. Juntos pasaremos por esta fase de dificultad. Y juntos nos unimos para acabar con los desafíos de nuestra sociedad, incluyendo el racismo estructural. Y nos protegemos el uno al otro del COVID-19 con quedarse en buena salud, quedarse protegidos y, cuando se puede, quedarse en casa. Mucha fuerza y mucho amor. Gracias, Los Ángeles, por su coraje.